It is Friday, May 7th. Let's talk PlayStation. So, last week was Returnal and Pokemon Snap. Today is Resident Evil Village Day, so we finally got some new stuff to play. Not that that's a bad thing, because I always have a backlog to work on, and I'm sure a lot of you do, but we do finally have those new titles that are coming out for this year, so that's great to see. But let's start with our PlayStation news, as always. Well, first, we'll get into our PS Plus reminder, so if you haven't yet, make sure you grab the May games. That's Wreckfest for PS5, Battlefield 5, and Stranded Deep for PlayStation 4. And by the way, we also know the May PS Now editions, which it's kind of a lackluster month, which is not all too surprising for PlayStation Now, but it's Jump Force that'll be available until August 2nd, then Neo is a more permanent edition, and then Streets of Rage 4 will be available until November 1st. So, yeah, I mean, we've got only 3-4 games every single month, and it seems like half of them have been available on PS Plus before, and then the other half are part of these rotating premium games that are only available until 6 months to a year, which isn't awful, but when you're only doing 3-4 games every single month, it does start to feel very disappointing. Now, getting into our first news story, let's actually start with Returnal's first week on the market, which it wasn't all too graceful, and the thing is, I am loving the game more than I thought I would. It really hit home for me, so I'm pleased on that front, and a lot of people are. They're really enjoying it if this is the kind of game where you can get down with it, but the thing is, and we knew prior to it coming out, but there is no way to save in between your runs, or rather during a run, which it is very long, right? It takes 3-4 hours if you've got a good build going, and while they recommend to put the console in rest mode, which it works, assuming the console doesn't, you don't have a power outage or something, or the game just for some reason doesn't load up properly. Now, it's been 5-6 months now. I have never had a major issue with rest mode, so just by experience it works. But what is so embarrassing about the situation is that they pushed out a patch for this game, and most PS5s out of the box, if you don't know, are set up to auto download and install patches while the console is in rest mode. Now, that's a cool quality of life feature, but at the same time, maybe just on a software level for PS5, it should know to not do that for software that's currently active and put into rest mode. And that's where some people came back to the game and their runs were gone because a new patch was pushed out, alongside a number of other things like your typical glitches and things like that for what is a brand new title. So, I mean, that's maybe a little bit more forgivable, but there are certain situations where you couldn't run through a door if you've got the DLC suit on. There's audio issues, certain things not appearing correctly visually. So these are things that can be fixed over time, but just inherently due to the genre of this game, it's very problematic, and it is shocking that as much as I love Housemarque, I don't know how this went through, not realizing the console's functionality, recommending rest mode, and that runs do take far too long. We have other roguelikes that let you do this, and you can set it up so it's not abusable from the player's point of view, right? And what makes this even worse is that one patch came out midweek, which was 1.3.3, and for a lot of folks, they downloaded it, jumped right in, and because this patch was supposed to solve a trophy issue, and in my playthrough, I did have a trophy that did not pop when it should have, and you'll probably see that later, but this patch actually was deleting save files, or really corrupting save files. So a new patch was recently put out. It was up in about 6-7 hours. Housemarque had to pull the patch away, or 1.3.3, they pulled that down, then they pushed out 3.4, which should solve the corruption issue, although if you lost your save file prior, you cannot get it back, and that's a lot of time wasted for what is a game that can get a little bit repetitive depending on how many times you're going through the game, and if you are good with it, right? I mean, that's another problem. Some people are struggling through the game, so they feel like they've made some major accomplishments getting to Biome 2, Biome 3, and losing that progress, which there are ways that you can, there's permanent things in the game, and there's permanent checkpoints and permanent shortcuts that you can take. So losing that is substantial for a lot of people. So I really feel for anybody that found themselves in that position. With that said, Housemarque has acknowledged all the issues up to this point, and it probably will take them a few weeks to put in a proper quit and save setting for mid-runs. But until then, the game had a very rough week, but it's very good, and I'm really enjoying it so far, at least. Next up, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of at this point, the PlayStation Store on desktop is not a very good user experience. Well, the new one, at least, that they relaunched about 7-8 months ago, something like that, right before PS5. It was missing a lot of things from the prior store, and one of those was filtering and sorting options. Well, it's finally back. And this is what we usually see with Sony when they launch new hardware, new software, new whatever. There is almost always not feature parity with the outgoing product, and that's where the desktop site is right now. So over time, it's slowly but surely getting just a bit better. Next up, filed this one under very surprising but great news, something that I did not think was actually going to happen, but Sony has made a minority investment in Discord, meaning Discord functionality is coming to PlayStation platforms early next year. Over on SIA's corporate blog, SIA President Sayeed Zakaria said, and I quote here, "Our goal is to bring the Discord and PlayStation experiences closer together on console and mobile starting early next year, allowing friends, groups, and communities to hang out, have fun, and communicate more easily while playing games together." So this is awesome, and if you do recall, back when communities were shut down on PlayStation 4, I said, look, I like the feature in practice, it was a great idea, but it was also half-baked, it wasn't really all that usable. So if you're going to do something like that, then why not integrate a more mature platform like Discord, right? And that's exactly what is happening here. Now, we don't know to what degree they'll actually incorporate Discord. There's many aspects of Discord in terms of features, usability, that they could tie in or not tie in altogether, and that's my only concern with something like this, is that it's a great idea, go all in, but I feel like they might not actually do that, especially because Discord is very usable. It does work great, and it could even, I could see it cannibalizing the native PSN messaging system that's built in PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, which we also don't know if this will come to PlayStation 4, right? So we saw communities close down. Discord can absolutely replicate that and then some on PS4, but I would have to imagine this might be PS5 and up. I'm not expecting any major PS4 firmware updates at this point moving forward, but it would be great, especially for PS4 where it is late life cycle, but there's still plenty of people actively buying and playing PS4 today. So, you know, that would be great to see. But this is just one of those things where, you know, I said it offhand, like, yeah, just go do something like Discord, but you don't expect Sony to do that because the company just doesn't do things like that. Oftentimes, there's so many features, aspects, customer requests that are right in front of them, and for whatever reason, whether it's not wanting to put up the money to do it, invest in R&D or what have you, or work with that potential company, they don't do these things. So this really is something where it's like, awesome, let's go all in. This is also interesting because, well, prior to this, we actually were hearing that Discord was speaking with Microsoft in terms of possibly being acquired for the tune of $10 billion, which is what Microsoft can afford to spend. That fell through, of course, and now we have Sony making a minority investment to further improve the PlayStation experience, and that's excellent considering that for PS5 as well, one of my criticisms is that the UI does feel very lonely and isolated. So despite the fact that we can say PS4's social features might not have been all that great, at least they were there and you felt a certain level of social interaction with your friends and seeing their activities. There's none of that on PS4, or PS5 rather, so this is 100% a step in the right direction. For our next news story, this past week, the Apple vs. Epic trial kicked off, and with that, we're learning a lot of things about the games business that we weren't supposed to know about. So things that Sony and Microsoft were planning on doing, or they're going to be doing, that stuff all leaked out, and the reason why Sony and Microsoft are involved in this trial is because, well, Apple and Epic, they're going to be bringing in a lot of outside parties to support or refute certain claims regarding what is inherently an argument between the two of them, right? So Epic wants Apple to open up iOS or open up the App Store so they can sell direct to the consumer and not have to pay that fee directly to Apple because they feel as though it's, you know, a high enough profit margin and a different business compared to the console market. Apple is going to argue against that and use the console market as an example of, hey, the split's the same everywhere else, it's the industry standard, you know, this, that, and the other, right? But the problem is that the console manufacturers and other storefronts and publishers have this documentation that's being submitted for evidence, and it's only meant to be for attorneys' eyes, but we did see some stuff leak out. So to start off, we have some slides from Microsoft, and one of the interesting things in there, well, first we learned about things like Stalker 2 having 3 months timed exclusivity, Tetris Effect is 6 months, and then The Gunk, if you don't know, that's apparently an exclusive in perpetuity. But there's one page about an internal review of The Last of Us Part 2, and it very much is a review of the game where Microsoft, or two individuals at Microsoft, actually played the game to its entirety and gave a breakdown with an overall assessment of how they feel on what is a competing product. and that is something that a lot of companies will do. They evaluate competing products all the time to understand how that might place that company against their own, and it's just really cool to see something like this firsthand. And they actually had a lot of very nice, high praise things to say about The Last of Us Part 2, with some criticism alongside it. So towards the end of this write-up, we won't go over all of it, but it says, and I quote, "The Last of Us Part 2 is the exceedingly rare video game where what it accomplishes in moving forward the art of narrative storytelling in video games as a medium ultimately outweighs whether or not everyone likes it, or even if everyone has fun playing it. That said, we loved it. We had a great time playing it and find ourselves still thinking about its characters and stories even after finishing the playthrough." Now that was how they concluded, but they did have some gripes with the gameplay where they said, and I quote here, "That said, Naughty Dog still can't seem to make decent gun combat in any of their games, and this one is no exception. Luckily for them, it fits with the game's overall theme and pushes the player towards using stealth over head-on." One big gripe about the moment-to-moment gameplay was really with the game's inventory system. The inputs for weapon switching are all located on the D-pad, and there was no quick switch between current and previous weapons. So unless you've got an additional thumb on your left hand, then you're going to have to take your thumb off the movement controls on the left stick in order to switch weapons, which was notably frustrating during the more frenetic combat sequences. So, like I said, there's a lot there. We can't go over all of it, but they were mostly positive. I'm just really surprised that they were so critical of Naughty Dog's gameplay. For all of their games, apparently they can't get this right. That was surprising because it seems like most people, when they play Part 2, whether they do or do not like the story, they do walk away sometimes saying that, yeah, the gameplay was good or it was a huge improvement over the previous one. And the thing is, Naughty Dog's gameplay is inherently very simple. There's not a whole lot going on, but I've always said this, sometimes less is more. You don't have to go crazy with gameplay. In fact, I can name a lot of titles nowadays that, you know, they're trying to do too much, and that overwhelms a lot of players sometimes. I don't like when you have these very complex skill trees that have these crazy abilities that you can unlock, but you're going to forget, or it complicates the control set. There's so much going on with some games nowadays, so oftentimes I like the less is more approach of just fine-tuning the very basic concept of point, shoot, cover, you know, walk around, make sure the game feels tight and responsive. And I think you can argue for certain aspects of Part 2 it does fall apart there, but largely I think the game accomplishes what it's trying to do. So I don't know, that was fascinating though. I mean, everybody has their opinions, right? So that's just how they took it, but they did have some glowing words for the game, and that is something that for Sony it's hard to ignore, right? Even from Microsoft's point of view, when they do those evaluations of the competitor, which is going to be Sony in this space, they're the closest competitor, you're going to have to walk away from it going, yeah, they've got some really compelling software, and that's something that we need to be aware of. Now, one other very revealing thing that we learned during the Apple versus Epic trials is Sony's stance on cross-play functionality, which, if you remember 2 years ago, Sony was very reluctant to turn this on and work with other platform holders to allow this functionality for a lot of games. They didn't want to do it, and at the time, we all knew why, of course, because Sony was the market leader. They still are the market leader, but they don't gain anything on the surface, so basically it just benefits everybody else and not Sony. But we are actually finding out how Sony came to allow this functionality originally with Fortnite, and then, of course, eventually other software as well. But we are seeing conversations, or 2 emails between Epic and Sony, and it's really interesting to see how this played out. So initially, Epic was trying to make a case and entice Sony, with Joe Kreiner, the business development at Epic, saying we can offer a number of things like deep integration of Sony's esports API into Unreal Engine 4, announcing crossplay in conjunction with Sony, specifically mentioning Epic goes out of their way to make Sony look like the hero. You get to pick when, where, and how. Epic brands its E3 presence with PlayStation. Epic's willing to explore more items like committing to a game for the next VR platform launched for Sony, something with PlayStation Plus. Epic extends Sony's company-wide Unreal Engine 4 license, so actually a lot of really good things that would have been very helpful to Sony, but still, the company was not on board. So Gio Corsi, if you remember him, he was the senior director of developer relations at Sony Interactive Entertainment. He responded saying, "I appreciate the points you've listed in the email. There's a lot of great ideas. However, cross-platform play is not a slam dunk, no matter the size of the title. As you know, many companies are exploring this idea, and not a single one can explain how cross-console play improves the PlayStation business. Open to your thoughts if Epic has ideas on this since we all last talked. Now, this was a while ago before Fortnite crossplay functionality was turned on, and we know today that Sony does support this for a number of games, but we found out it's due to a cross-platform revenue share system that Sony put in place in case there is a reduction in revenue from a cross-play game. So this slide came out of the trial, and you can see that it's based on it's a ratio more or less of playtime versus overall PSN revenue being generated, and if it falls under 85%, this is where the publisher would have to pay something to Sony directly. So it's based on consumer behavior. It's not something that you as the consumer would have to pay, but rather if you, as an example, mostly play on PlayStation 4, but for some reason you decide to buy V-Bucks on iOS, Xbox, or whatever, which I'm not even sure, I don't think those V-Bucks can carry over to PlayStation, but either way, if that's what you did, and that happened a lot to the point where the gameplay share versus revenue share was offset, then Epic would have to make a payment directly to Sony because they would have been spending on PlayStation if it was a closed ecosystem, more or less. So you can see month one as an example, $1 million of total cross-platform revenue. $900,000 was spent on PSN. That's a 90% split, over 85%. No payment to Sony. Month two, $1 million, $600,000 was on PSN. That's a 60% PSN revenue split, but people are still mostly playing on PS4. Sony says, okay, pay us $52,500. And Epic has confirmed that not only is Sony the only one that has this revenue share system, but Epic has been in months where they had to make this payment directly to Sony. What's concerning about this is, yeah, they're the platform leader, yeah, it makes business sense, but does this apply to every single publisher, every single developer? Is this tailored to certain situations? Because, some publishers might be smaller and they might not want to take that gamble, because this sounds almost like a gamble from their point of view, right? They would have to make the payment directly to Sony, and they can't completely control consumer behavior. So if crossplay functionality is there, they're playing mostly on PS4, and that will inherently always be the case because PS4 is the lead platform in this situation. PS5 is likely going to be a lead platform for a while. So inherently there will be a lot of engagement and playtime on PlayStation platforms, but they can't really control if somebody decides to, spend money on DLC on another ecosystem because it's just there right in front of them, right? Maybe iOS, it's very easy to make a purchase there, which it is. It's just 2 taps of the lock button. If you've got Face ID, it just captures it right there. Done. Payment's done. It's super easy. That alone might entice consumers to spend more on that ecosystem versus PlayStation, and that's where, that's really out of the publisher's control. And if it is a smaller game, they're not going to want to deal with that. So I would love to know if this is the same across the board for everybody, or if Sony will make exceptions or fine-tune this revenue share for each specific situation, which, they could certainly do, but they also might not do. And that's the caveat here, is that we can't say for certain if this is something that's always happening for every single publisher. And also worth noting that we are getting some great insight into how the business works, but also I can guarantee you there's plenty of things like this for Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, iOS, Android, Google, all the PC storefronts. There are tons of deals and contracts in place behind the scenes that are often going to be very favorable to their bottom line, because that is what's happening, right? It's a simple reality of it. And if you recall, 2 years ago, I was for cross-play functionality. I understood Sony's position. I think we all understand it, but it's a goodwill initiative that, yeah, it may hurt your bottom line, but it's goodwill. It's, my argument was if you make a good platform, if you have good software, a good ecosystem, a good storefront, a friendly payment system, right, you are going to naturally have that revenue share in your favor anyway. So that's always been my argument. So it's disappointing to see this come out, but we can't say for certain if this really applies to everybody, but it could be very harmful depending on the situation. Now, moving on to our next news story, it looks like there's a report coming out from DigiTimes that Sony is looking to redesign the internals of PS5 in 2022. So this wouldn't necessarily be an external change. It wouldn't change the way PS5 inherently looks, not a slim console, which that will more than likely happen eventually, but not in 2022. That would be too soon. But what Sony might be doing is going from a 7nm process to a 6nm process with the manufacturer TSMC. So this is par for the course, I'd say, when it comes to just the life cycle of a console. PlayStation 5 is eventually going to have a model revision that on the surface doesn't look all too different, but it might draw less power, it might generate less heat, which is something that we know Sony's very concerned with PlayStation 5, or at least the production or the R&D of it, right? We know that there's a lot going into PS5 to make sure that it operates cool and quietly, because these consoles are actual workhorses when you understand what's actually going on with these things. They do get very hot. That's why they need a lot of very appropriate cooling. So we could see a new PlayStation 5 console being available in 2022 that maybe runs a little bit quieter, which, you know, the console's already really quiet. They could possibly make a change to the power supply so there's not some, you know, the coil whine issue that's going on. They could change a number of things. I mean, honestly, anything that they change with this hardware will at some point eventually warrant a new model number revision. And they could also make some soft changes to the external appearance, right? So with PS4 and PS3, that original hardware design did see some small physical changes. So that could happen for PlayStation 5. Maybe that glossy strip in the middle goes to a matte finish, which I think's almost expected. I think they would actually do that before we eventually see a PS5 Slim, but it looks like that might end up happening for PS5 in 2022. Not all too surprising. In fact, it's very much expected. Next up, we talked a lot about Epic versus Apple, but it looks like there will be a new trial starting a long time from now, because this class action lawsuit was recently filed against none other than Sony themselves. So this is in regards to the PlayStation Store. More specifically, it's about how Sony stopped offering a year and a half, 2 years ago, those PSN cards for specific titles. So not just PSN currency. So you'd go home, redeem it, you'd actually get a game instead of just adding funds to your PSN wallet. So the claimant here is arguing, and I quote here, Sony's monopoly allows it to charge super competitive prices for digital PlayStation games, which are significantly higher than their physical counterparts sold in a competitive retail market, and significantly higher than they would be in a competitive retail market for digital games. So they're arguing that these cards need to be available at retail, so that way that retailers can compete against one another and possibly discount the cards, much like we see with physical games. I don't know if this would hold up very well in court. As far as I know, other platform holders also stopped offering these cards directly for certain games and not just funding your digital wallet. And I don't know if it really fits quite to the same degree of physical games, because physical games take up so much retail space, and there's also the used market, which Sony has no control over. I mean, I think there's a lot of areas where Sony could easily cover and argue against this. So I don't see this holding up all that well, but I mean, this is the reality of buying and playing digital content. That's why I've always recommended that you not get a digital edition PS5. Maybe a Series S works for some families and some situations, but it's all digital. I would really argue against that too. I'm not really for it. I've never been about it. There's just too many downfalls, and you're losing too much, and this is one example of what you're giving up when you're stuck with a digital marketplace specifically. But that's something that they'll probably argue here is the PS5 digital edition. So we'll see how this plays out, but it'll be quite a while until we see it play out. Moving on to our next news story, looks like Insomniac Games has recently renewed their trademark for Sunset Overdrive. And that's it, that's all we know. So there's no indicator that we're getting a new game, a sequel, or a port of the original to PS4 and PS5, nothing like that. But we do know at the time when Insomniac was working with Microsoft, this was a period of the studio's history where they wanted to retain independence, and they also wanted to retain their IP. So this is why for a while they left PlayStation, because Sony was keeping all those IP. And I think actually EA also kept the IP to Fuse, maybe not, I'm not entirely sure. But either way, we do know that when Sony acquired Insomniac Games, they kept Sunset Overdrive, and thus Sony also has access to the Sunset Overdrive IP. So yeah, we could eventually see a revisit to this franchise, although I wouldn't expect it just given what Insomniac's been doing lately with Ratchet, Spider-Man. I think it's kind of predictable right now to know what they're going to be doing eventually, so it might be a long-term thing if we see a revisit to Sunset eventually, but I do think that this was a great game. It's got a lot of potential. We could see more, but I wouldn't hold out hope anytime soon for it. For our next news story, it looks like Konami has actually pulled out of E3 this year. So originally they were going to be there, but they posted on Twitter that due to timing, they're just not going to be able to make it, but they'll talk more later in the year, presumably, and they'll have some things to share. To what degree, I don't necessarily know, but it's something that we'll bring up here because Up to this point, we've been following one, the Silent Hill rumor, and now this new Metal Gear Solid rumor, both IPs that belong to Konami, so whether Sony is or is not involved, it's going to include Konami to some degree because they can easily, work out deals for these IP, right? So that's just something where we'll keep an eye on what Konami's doing, but if they are involved with another platform holder like Sony or even Microsoft, this would be something where I would imagine Sony or Microsoft or anybody involved for that matter would want to announce it and show it off on their terms and not necessarily Konami's, right? That's exactly how this would go down. Not to say that they're pulling out of E3 because they're going to be showing off these games during a state of play or something like that, but it's just somewhat noteworthy that for right now at least Konami has nothing to say, or they won't have anything to say by next month when E3 2021 will kick off. Now, with all that said, it is time to get to Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. If you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to pay for your games. Those are all the news stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was a bunch of recent pickups that are very expensive. So game collecting, right? You all know I love game collecting. And the random lots, we'll still do some eventually. I know a lot of people keep asking for them, but this is kind of a sequel idea to that, right? Because it's going to be tough to find interesting software in those random lots. So I'll also show you some of the pickups that I've been buying personally and be transparent, show you prices, the condition, all that stuff. So go check that out, and by all means, please let me know if that's something that you're okay with also continuing to see, because I do also buy a lot of games on the side sometimes, but those prices it's just too much money, because one of them was like $170, which sucks. But that's all I've got for you. This coming Tuesday, it might not be on Tuesday, depending on how this weekend goes. So I'm playing Returnal, capturing a lot of my gameplay. I think you know where this might go, but I have to see how I do this weekend. So until then, that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.